My name is Cassie, and I am 27 years old. I never thought the person who gave me life would be the one to almost take it away from my unborn child. The heavy metal camera tripod cracked against my skull with a sickening thud, sending a shockwave of sheer agony straight down my spine. The world tilted violently. Blood poured into my eyes, blinding me, as my 8-month pregnant belly slammed hard into the sharp edge of the oak dining table. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gasping for air, as a warm rush of amniotic fluid pooled beneath me, mixing with the blood. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard my mother yelling at the horrified guests not to help me. I managed to press speed dial for my husband Declan, and then 911, my vision fading. They all thought I was ruined. What they did not know was that in exactly 15 minutes, an entire fleet of police cruisers would turn this lavish engagement party into a crime scene. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to legally sever ties with a toxic family member. To understand how my own mother left me bleeding on the floor, we have to go back exactly 3 minutes. The air in the rented mansion was thick with the smell of expensive catering and cheap perfume. It was my sister Madison's engagement party. She was 29, unemployed, and marrying Jamal, a 32-year-old man who claimed to be a high-rolling real estate investor. I was standing near the gift table trying to ease the constant ache in my lower back when my mother Brenda marched over with a look of absolute entitlement on her face. She did not ask how I was feeling or if the baby was kicking. She held out her manicured hand and demanded the keys to my brand new luxury vehicle. I stared at her thinking it was some kind of twisted joke. I asked her why on earth she would need my car keys. Brenda rolled her eyes, her voice carrying over the soft jazz music playing in the background. She said Madison and Jamal needed a reliable luxury vehicle to drive to their honeymoon and to meet with his high-profile investors. When I told her absolutely not, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She stepped into my personal space, pointing a sharp acrylic nail right at my chest. "You work from home on your fake little computer business," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Jamal is a real estate investor. He needs to look the part. I am your mother. Give me the keys right now. It is the least you can do for your sister, since you are hoarding all your wealth while she is trying to start a family." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my heart rate down for the baby's sake. I calmly explained that my company was a federal cybersecurity contractor, not a fake little business, and the car was a company asset loaded with sensitive tracking equipment. I told her Jamal could rent a luxury car if he was actually as rich as he claimed to be. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. I turned my back to walk away to remove myself from her toxic presence, just like my therapist had taught me. I thought she would just hurl another insult. I never expected physical violence. I never saw the blow coming. Brenda had grabbed the heavy professional-grade camera tripod that the event photographer had left leaning near the photo booth. She swung it like a baseball bat with all her might. The brutal impact shattered the uneasy peace of the room. The pain was immediate and blinding. The opulent chandelier above me spun wildly out of focus as darkness crept into the edges of my vision. I stumbled sideways, my hands instinctively flying down to protect my unborn son, but I could not stop my downward momentum. My stomach crashed heavily into the sharp corner of the oak table before my knees hit the floor. I hit the ground hard. The breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. I felt the warm, terrifying gush of my water breaking completely out of my control, followed immediately by the horrifying sight of dark blood pooling on the polished wood beneath me. Guests gasped in collective horror. A few people stepped forward, their faces pale with shock, ready to help me. But Brenda aggressively blocked their path, spreading her arms wide. Jamal stood right behind her, arms crossed, staring down at me with cold indifference. "Leave her alone!" Brenda screamed, waving her arms frantically to usher the concerned crowd back. "She is faking it for attention. She has been jealous of Madison all night. Do not let her ruin this beautiful evening. She just wants to make everything about her." I lay there clutching my stomach, silently praying for my baby boy to keep moving. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat, echoing the sheer terror washing over my entire body. The pain in my abdomen was sharp and terrifying, unlike any normal contraction. With trembling blood-slicked fingers, I reached into my maternity cardigan pocket. I pulled out my phone and blindly hit the speed dial button for Declan. He was a senior financial investigator for the federal government, and I knew he was only a few miles away. I left the line open so he could hear the absolute chaos in the room. Then I blindly dialed 911. I could not speak, but I knew the emergency dispatcher could hear my mother screaming in the background, complaining about how my blood was ruining the aesthetic of the party. The cold reality of her absolute betrayal pierced deeper than any physical injury I had sustained tonight. I closed my eyes, focusing all my fading energy on staying conscious and breathing through the agonizing cramps. My family had finally crossed the ultimate point of no return, and they were about to pay the absolute highest price for their cruelty. The pain radiating from my abdomen was blinding, crashing over me in relentless, suffocating waves. I gasped for air, curling tightly into myself as another massive contraction seized my entire body. Above me, the lavish engagement party carried on in a bizarre, muted surrealism. Brenda was actually shooing the hired caterers back toward the seafood buffet, loudly proclaiming to the bewildered guests that pregnant women are notoriously dramatic, and that everyone should just ignore my little tantrum. I looked up through my tear-blurred vision, desperately hoping to find a single shred of empathy in my older sister's face. Instead, Madison was staring down at her feet with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Watch out!" Madison whined loudly, lifting the delicate hem of her expensive silk gown to avoid the growing puddle on the floor. "You are getting blood on my designer heels. Seriously, Cassie, could you have picked a worse time to make a scene? This is my engagement night. You are ruining my perfect aesthetic." She actually stepped over me. My own flesh and blood sister stepped right over my bleeding, laboring body, just so she could check her reflection in the gilded antique mirror hanging on the far wall. I let out a guttural, involuntary groan as another sharp, tearing pain ripped through my pelvis. The fluid from my ruptured amniotic sac was completely soaking into the expensive Persian rug, and I could feel my baby pressing down dangerously hard. I needed a hospital immediately. I needed Declan here right now. Right at that moment, a pair of pristine, expensive Italian leather loafers stopped mere inches from my face. It was Jamal. He crouched down beside me, but his hands made no move to help me up. His dark eyes darted to the floor, where my leather purse had spilled open during the violent fall. He reached out with calculated precision and casually plucked my heavy set of BMW keys from the polished wood. A smug, arrogant, utterly sickening smirk spread across his handsome face. "I will go pull the beamer around baby," Jamal called out to Madison, jiggling my keys right in front of my face so I could hear the metallic clink. "Best to get the expensive gifts loaded up early before your sister completely ruins the vibe in here and kills the party mood." I tried to grab his ankle to demand he drop my property, but a fresh wave of blinding agony paralyzed my muscles. Jamal just chuckled a cold and hollow sound that chilled me to the bone, and he walked confidently out the heavy oak front doors of the mansion. Brenda started clapping her hands aggressively, demanding the hired string quartet resume playing their classical music. They were literally leaving me on the floor to suffer and potentially lose my child, all while they casually stole my company vehicle. But they severely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. They saw a pregnant, bleeding victim and assumed I was powerless. They completely forgot that I built a highly lucrative federal cybersecurity firm from the ground up. I forced myself to roll onto my side, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted warm copper. With badly trembling fingers, I retrieved my smartphone from my maternity sweater pocket. Declan was still on the open line. Through the tiny speaker, I could hear the aggressive roar of his high-performance engine and the screech of tires, which meant he was driving like a madman to reach me. I minimized the active call screen and quickly opened my security company's proprietary fleet management application. My BMW was not just a luxury status symbol. It was a highly advanced rolling fortress, equipped with military-grade surveillance, GPS, tracking, and anti-theft protocols legally registered to a federal contractor. I watched the sleek digital app interface load on my screen. A flashing green dot on the satellite map, Confirmed Jamal had just started the engine in the circular driveway outside. I could perfectly picture him sinking into the heated premium leather seats, probably admiring himself in the rearview mirror, genuinely thinking he had won the jackpot. I took a ragged, painful breath and tapped the remote override command on my screen. First, I manually engaged the total engine kill switch. Outside the heavy mansion doors, the low, powerful rumble of the BMW exhaust system instantly choked and died. Next, I activated the maximum security lockdown protocol. I heard the faint, sharp chirp of the vehicle's internal alarm system engaging from the driveway. The reinforced doors simultaneously deadbolted. The electronic child locks engaged on all panels. The heavy tinted windows rolled up instantly and electronically froze in place. The steering column locked down tight. I had just turned my $100,000 vehicle into an impenetrable titanium prison cell, and Jamal was completely trapped inside. A few seconds later, Jamal's muffled, panicked shouts drifted in from the driveway. He was violently pounding his fists against the reinforced shatterproof glass. Madison frowned deeply, walking toward the large front window to see what the commotion was all about. But the sharp, terrifying pain ripping through my spine commanded all my attention again. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching my phone tightly to my chest, praying frantically for my baby boy to hold on. The contractions were coming less than 2 minutes apart now. My time was rapidly running out. Then the sound hit the cool night air. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the far distance, growing steadily louder and much more aggressive by the second. But it was not just one lone siren. It was an absolute chorus of them. The piercing, urgent shriek of an emergency medical ambulance was accompanied by the deep, terrifying growls of multiple police cruisers, tearing recklessly up the long private road leading to the rented estate. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light suddenly bathed the massive front windows in a chaotic, spinning glow, completely washing out the warm, romantic ambient lighting of the engagement party. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing their bows, hovering awkwardly over their instruments. The affluent guests froze completely expensive wine glasses suspended in midair. Brenda's smug face instantly drained of all its color, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. "What on earth is going on out there?" Brenda demanded, her voice finally losing its arrogant, commanding edge as absolute panic set in. "Why are there cops blocking the driveway?" Before anyone could formulate an answer, the heavy front doors burst open with explosive, violent force. The heavy oak slammed hard against the interior wall, completely shattering an expensive glass sconce. There stood Declan. My husband was a towering figure of absolute fury, his federal investigator badge flashing brightly as it hung from the heavy chain around his neck. His sharp eyes scanned the opulent room with lethal intensity, taking in the shocked crowd of guests, Brenda's pale and trembling face, and finally, the horrific sight of me lying in a massive pool of blood on the floor. "Nobody move a single muscle!" Declan roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings like a deafening crack of thunder. The entire party froze in absolute breathless terror. The long reign of my family's toxic empire had just violently collided with federal authority, and the fallout was going to be nothing short of biblical. Declan's heavy boots pounded against the hardwood floor, closing the distance between the shattered front doors and my bleeding body in mere seconds. He moved with a terrifying, singular focus, completely ignoring the sea of affluent guests who had parted like the Red Sea. 2 heavily armed police officers and a team of paramedics trailed right behind his towering frame. Seeing the cavalry arrive, Brenda immediately switched into her practiced, manipulative public persona. She smoothed down the front of her expensive silk dress, painted a look of false maternal concern across her face, and stepped directly into his path to intercept him. "Declan, thank God you are here!" Brenda cried out, her voice dripping with fake relief. "Cassie just tripped and fell so hard. She is so clumsy with her center of gravity lately, you know how pregnant women get. It was just a terrible, unpredictable accident. She is fine really, we just need to get her up so we can continue the toast." Declan did not even look at her face. He violently shoved past her shoulder with such forceful momentum that she stumbled backward, her expensive champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering into 100 pieces on the floor. He dropped to his knees beside me, his hands gently framing my face. His eyes, usually so calm and analytical, were wide with absolute horror as he took in the massive pool of blood and amniotic fluid soaking into the rug. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I felt the cold, efficient hands of the paramedics taking over. They pushed Declan back just an inch to slide a rigid backboard underneath my spine. A sharp cry ripped from my throat as they moved me. Brenda, completely enraged that she was being ignored in a room full of people she was trying to impress, marched right back over. She reached out and grabbed Declan by the shoulder of his jacket, trying to physically pull him away from the paramedics. I said she just tripped, Declan. You are overreacting and ruining Madison's special night, Brenda snapped. Declan stood up slowly, his towering frame casting a long dark shadow over my mother. The sheer rage radiating off him was palpable, freezing the air in the room. He raised a firm, shaking finger and pointed directly at the heavy metal camera tripod resting near the photo booth. It was visibly coated in bright red blood and long strands of my dark hair. Does tripping on a flat floor put human tissue on a 5-pound piece of steel? Brenda. Declan asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, lethal register that made several guests physically take a step back. Before Brenda could formulate another lie, the medical crisis escalated. A paramedic ripped open my maternity shirt and slapped a portable fetal heart monitor directly onto my soaked belly. The machine sputtered for a second before emitting a rapid, erratic beeping sound that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. It was the sound of a failing heartbeat. We have massive fetal distress and suspected placental abruption, the lead paramedic shouted to his team, his voice laced with pure adrenaline. We need immediate transport for an emergency surgical delivery. Move, move, move. Brenda crossed her arms over her chest, letting out a loud theatrical scoff. She is just being dramatic to punish us, Brenda announced to the room, completely detached from the reality that her grandchild was currently dying. Tell them to turn those annoying machines off. People are trying to eat. Declan turned away from her in absolute disgust. He locked eyes with the 2 uniformed police officers standing guard by the entrance. He gave them a single sharp nod and pointed directly at my mother. The officers marched forward with heavy, purposeful strides. One officer grabbed Brenda's arm forcefully, twisting it behind her back with practiced, unyielding efficiency. The distinct, heavy metallic click of police handcuffs echoed sharply through the suddenly silent dining room. Brenda shrieked like a banshee, thrashing wildly against the officer's grip. "Get your filthy hands off me!" she screamed, her carefully crafted high society mask completely shattering. "Do you know who I am? I am the mother of the bride. You are ruining the aesthetic of this party. Madison, call my lawyer. Declan, tell them to stop this instant." The officer spun her around and read her rights in a loud, booming voice that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against a pregnant woman. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you start using right now before you make this worse for yourself." Madison dropped to her knees in the center of the room, sobbing hysterically into her hands, her perfect engagement party completely destroyed by the very woman who orchestrated it. Amidst the absolute chaos of Brenda being dragged out the front doors, kicking and screaming, and the paramedics securing me to the heavy gurney, I noticed a subtle movement near the kitchen corridor. It was Jamal. He was trying to slip out the back servant entrance, abandoning his brand-new fiancée, his arrested future mother-in-law, and the locked luxury vehicle sitting idle in the driveway. Declan saw exactly where my eyes were tracking. He moved with terrifying predatory speed, cutting diagonally across the dining room and physically blocking the heavy wooden exit door just as Jamal reached for the brass handle. Jamal held up both of his hands, flashing his trademark charismatic, smooth-talking smile, though sweat was visibly beading on his forehead. "Hey, man, this is family business," Jamal said smoothly. "I'm just going to give you all some space to sort this out. No need for any trouble." Declan stepped closer, his federal investigator badge gleaming sharply under the bright kitchen lights. "You are not going anywhere," Jamal Declan said coldly. "You made a very stupid, highly documented mistake tonight." Jamal dropped the fake smile, puffing out his chest to act legally offended. "I was just trying to move her car out of the way for the ambulance. She trapped me inside it. That is unlawful imprisonment, and my real estate lawyers will have a field day with her." Declan laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that stripped away the last ounce of Jamal's false bravado. that BMW is legally registered to a federal cybersecurity contractor, Declan revealed, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You are not sitting in a standard luxury sedan. You are sitting in a rolling surveillance hub equipped with interior cabin audio, high-definition dash cameras, and cloud-linked telematics. And you are incredibly stupid for sitting in it while holding a burner phone. Jamal's handsome face instantly drained of all its color. He swallowed hard, taking a step back. Declan leaned in closer. Care to explain why my federal database flagged the stolen license plates you had tucked under the floorboard in the trunk? Or should we talk about the suspended driver's license you are currently hiding in your left breast pocket? Jamal stammered frantically, trying to formulate a lie. But a third police officer stepped up right beside Declan, forcefully grabbing Jamal by the collar of his expensive tailored tuxedo. We have a whole lot of questions for you downtown, the officer stated firmly, violently, pushing Jamal against the wall to pat him down. Jamal was roughly detained, his pockets emptied right in front of the kitchen staff. As the paramedics finally rushed my gurney out the front doors and into the chaotic flashing red lights of the waiting ambulance, I turned my head just enough to see the destruction. Brenda was currently pressed against the reinforced back window of a police cruiser screaming obscenities, while Jamal was forced to his knees on the manicured front lawn in handcuffs. The first domino had officially fallen. The harsh fluorescent lights of the ambulance ceiling blurred into a continuous blinding white streak as the heavy vehicle swerved through the city streets. Above me, the piercing wail of the sirens served as a terrifying soundtrack to the chaos unfolding inside the tight cabin. The lead paramedic working over my chest barked a series of rapid medical codes into his radio receiver. He reported severe fetal bradycardia and massive maternal hemorrhage, warning the hospital that we were dealing with a severe placental abruption. Every time the heavy ambulance hit a bump in the asphalt, a fresh wave of excruciating, tearing pain ripped through my pelvis, accompanied by another horrifying gush of blood soaking into the stiff stretcher sheets. I clung to Declan's hand with such desperate force that my knuckles turned completely white. My breathing was ragged, shallow, and laced with absolute panic. The moment the ambulance slammed to a violent halt at the emergency room trauma bay, a massive medical team was already waiting at the sliding doors. They swarmed the gurney instantly, ripping the intravenous lines from the paramedics' hands and sprinting down the stark white hospital corridors. The heavy double doors of the trauma center flew open. I heard the attending obstetrician shouting for an immediate crash cesarean section. There was absolutely no time for a standard epidural block or a spinal tap. They wheeled me directly into a freezing cold operating room under blinding surgical lights. An anesthesiologist loomed over my face with a clear plastic mask. His voice calm but undeniably urgent, as he explained that they had to put me under general anesthesia immediately. My baby was rapidly losing oxygen due to the blunt force trauma. A cold burning chemical sensation shot aggressively up my arm through the central line. The very last thing I heard before my consciousness faded into an absolute terrifying darkness was the frantic, high-pitched alarm of the fetal heart monitor flatlining. I woke up hours later to the slow, rhythmic, mechanical hissing of a hospital ventilator and the sharp, sterile smell of medical-grade antiseptic. My throat felt like it was coated in shattered glass from the endotracheal intubation tube they had forced down my airway. A heavy, agonizing pressure weighed down on my lower abdomen, a brutal reminder of the emergency surgical incision cut through my muscle tissue. I blinked against the harsh, dim lighting of the intensive care unit, the steady beeping of my pulse oximeter echoing in the quiet room. Declan was sitting in a cheap, hard plastic chair beside my bed, his face buried deep in his hands. His expensive dress shirt was completely ruined, permanently stained with large dark patches of my dried blood. Hearing me shift painfully against the stiff hospital sheets, his head snapped up. His eyes were completely bloodshot, dark purple circles carved deep into his pale skin. He leaned over the metal bed rail and pressed his forehead gently against mine, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, exhausted sobs. I tried to speak, but only a raspy, painful croak escaped my dry, cracked lips. I managed to weakly mouth the word baby. Declan took a deep, shuddering breath and gently stroked my damp hair. Our son is alive, Declan whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of profound exhaustion and lingering fear. He is in the neonatal intensive care unit 2 floors above us. He was born at barely 32 weeks. He is incredibly small, Cassie, and his lungs are severely underdeveloped. He is currently on a continuous positive airway pressure machine, fighting for every single breath inside a plastic incubator. The neonatal specialists are constantly monitoring him for potential brain hypoxia because of the massive blood loss you suffered. Hot tears of absolute terror and profound relief spilled down my cheeks, stinging my skin. My tiny baby boy was fighting a desperate battle for his life in a sterile plastic box, entirely because my own mother decided to use my pregnant body as a physical punching bag over a luxury vehicle. I desperately needed to see him, to touch his tiny hand, but the attending nurses had strictly ordered me to remain completely flat on my back for the next 24 hours to prevent my fresh surgical incision from hemorrhaging. Declan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. He hesitated for a brief second, his jaw clenching tightly with barely suppressed rage. "Your phone has not stopped vibrating since they wheeled you into the operating room," Declan said, his tone turning completely cold and hollow. "I was going to throw it directly into the biohazard trash bin, but you need to see exactly who these people are right now." I reached out with a trembling hand and took the heavy device from him. The digital lock screen was completely covered with dozens of unread text messages and missed calls. My heart pounded as I scanned the notifications. Not a single message was from the hospital asking for an update on my critical medical condition. Not a single notification asked if my premature baby had actually survived the brutal, violent trauma. Every single unread notification was from my father, Thomas, and my sister, Madison. I unlocked the screen and opened the primary family group chat. The absolute toxicity radiating from the digital text made my stomach violently turn. The first message was from Thomas, sent barely an hour after I was rushed bleeding into the emergency room. "You sent your own mother to jail over a stupid car," Thomas typed, using all capital letters to emphasize his blind, unhinged rage. "What is wrong with you, Cassie? Have the police drop the criminal charges right now. You are completely destroying your sister's engagement and humiliating this entire family in front of Jamal's wealthy investors. Call the local precinct and tell them it was a simple misunderstanding before the local news gets a hold of this scandal." Madison had chimed in right beneath him, her messages arriving in rapid, frantic succession. "You are such a selfish narcissist, Cassie," she wrote. "You just could not stand the fact that the spotlight was finally on me for one single night. Mom is sitting in a dirty holding cell crying her eyes out because you decided to be dramatic and call the federal police on my fiancé. Jamal is completely traumatized by your psycho husband. You better fix this legal mess right now or you are completely dead to us." I dropped the phone onto my chest, staring blankly at the acoustic tiles on the hospital ceiling. The realization washed over me like a bucket of freezing ice water. I had almost bled to death on a hardwood floor. My newborn son was struggling to keep his lungs inflated through a plastic tube. Yet my father and my sister only cared about the public optics of an arrest and the bruised ego of a man they barely knew. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as an inconvenient obstacle to their perfect social image. The final shred of guilt I held for my family completely vanished in that sterile hospital room, replaced by a cold, calculated determination to protect my son at all costs. I did not have to wait long for the first physical assault on my boundaries. Less than 12 hours after my emergency surgery, while I was still tethered to the hospital bed by a labyrinth of intravenous tubes, heavy footsteps echoed menacingly down the quiet maternity ward corridor. Thomas had completely bypassed the main hospital reception. He likely tailgated behind a distracted delivery driver to infiltrate the secure critical care floor. I could see his face clearly through the large glass observation window of my room. He was practically vibrating with rage. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson, and his expensive custom-tailored suit jacket was severely wrinkled. Clutched tightly in his right fist was a thick manila folder, which I instantly recognized as legal documents. He had come to force a police retraction. Declan was pacing the hallway outside my door, holding a stale cup of cafeteria coffee. When he saw Thomas charging down the corridor like a bull seeing red, Declan dropped the coffee directly into a nearby trash bin and immediately squared his broad shoulders. He stepped firmly into the center of the hallway, forming an impenetrable human barricade between my enraged father and my hospital door. "Move out of my way, Declan!" Thomas barked loudly, waving the manila folder aggressively in the air. "I am not here to play silly legal games with you. I am here to see my daughter. She needs to sign these affidavits right now so we can get her mother out of a county holding cell before the local newspapers publish the arrest logs and ruin our reputation." Declan did not even flinch. "You are not stepping one single foot inside this room, Thomas." Declan replied, his voice dangerously low and steady, echoing with the trained authority of a federal agent. "Your daughter just had her abdomen sliced open because your wife decided to use her as a physical punching bag. Your newborn grandson is currently on life support 2 floors above us fighting for every single breath. And your absolute first priority is a public relations crisis. Do not lecture me about family loyalty." Thomas spat back, taking a highly aggressive step forward. "Cassie caused this entire mess by acting like a spoiled brat over a luxury car. Brenda just lost her temper for a second. It was a momentary mistake. But Cassie pressing federal charges against Jamal and letting the police lock up her own mother is an unforgivable betrayal to this family. She is going to sign this statement claiming she tripped and fell, or I swear to God she will never see a single dime of her inheritance." My blood ran completely cold, but my mind was sharper than ever. From my hospital bed, I reached out with a trembling hand and pressed the heavy intercom button clamped to my bed rail. My voice cracked over the hallway speaker, but it held absolutely no hesitation. "I do not want your money, Thomas," I said loudly, causing my father's head to snap violently toward the glass window. "I want you to turn around and leave right now." "Cassie, stop this dramatic nonsense immediately," Thomas commanded through the glass, stepping around Declan to slap his open palm violently against the reinforced pane. "You are completely destroying Madison's life. Jamal's high-profile real estate investors are pulling their funding because of this ridiculous police circus. Sign the paper so we can all go home and forget this ugly incident ever happened. You owe your sister this much." I refused to be intimidated. I reached over and pressed the bright red emergency call button on my bedside remote. Within seconds, the sharp blare of a security alert echoed down the entire ward. The flashing lights above my door spun wildly, indicating a code gray for a hostile intruder. 2 large hospital security guards rounded the corner at a full sprint, their hands resting heavily on their utility belts. Declan reached into his jacket pocket and flashed his federal investigator badge directly to the guards, pointing firmly at Thomas. "This man is aggressively trespassing and legally harassing a critical care patient," Declan stated with absolute authority. "Remove him from the premises immediately. I am establishing a strict no-contact order on behalf of my wife. I want him permanently banned from this hospital building, and if he resists, you have my full authorization to detain him for local police." The guards did not hesitate. They immediately flanked Thomas, grabbing him firmly by both arms. Thomas thrashed violently against their tight grip, his polished high society demeanor completely shattering into a million pieces. He looked through the glass, his eyes wild with desperate fury. "You are making the absolute biggest mistake of your entire life, Cassie," he screamed, his voice echoing shrilly down the pristine white corridor as the guards began to physically drag him backward. "You are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are completely dead to us. We will never ever forgive you for ruining your sister's wedding." I stared right into his furious, unhinged eyes, pressing the intercom button one final time. I poured every ounce of my maternal protective instinct into my response. My voice was colder than absolute zero, cutting straight through his pathetic manipulation. "You chose a scammer and an abuser over your own grandson," I replied, enunciating every single word so it would echo inside his head forever. "Do not ever come near my child." The guards forcefully pulled him through the heavy double security doors. The thick magnetic locks engaged with a loud, definitive, and highly satisfying click. The hallway fell completely silent again. Declan walked slowly back into my room, his chest heaving slightly from the intense adrenaline rush. He locked the heavy wooden door behind him and sat down gently on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in his. The physical boundary had been successfully drawn, But I knew the legal war was only just beginning. Thomas thought he could bully me into submission while I was bleeding and vulnerable. He was incredibly wrong. I looked at Declan and told him to contact my corporate attorney immediately. We were going to file a permanent restraining order against Brenda Thomas and Madison. I would not allow their toxic poison to infect my son's life for a single second. They had made their horrific choice, and now they were going to choke on the severe consequences. While I remained securely behind the hospital lockdown protocols, my family was busy digging their own financial grave. Brenda's felony charge for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon carried a massive bail bond, set at exactly $100,000. Because my parents had spent their entire adult lives living well beyond their means to maintain a pathetic facade of upper-class wealth, Thomas did not have the liquid cash to secure her immediate release. Driven by blind panic and a desperate pathological need to keep up appearances, he made a catastrophic financial decision. Without consulting a lawyer or a financial advisor, Thomas secretly took out a massive high-interest second mortgage on their family home. He literally signed away the very roof over his head, leveraging decades of equity just to get his abusive wife out of a dirty county holding cell before the local news stations could get their hands on her mugshot. But instead of returning to their heavily mortgaged home and laying low like any rational person facing serious felony charges would do, Brenda immediately went on the offensive. Less than 2 hours after posting bail, she and Madison launched a highly orchestrated, vicious public smear campaign. They sat close together on the expensive white leather sofa in their living room and went live on Facebook. I watched the broadcast on my smartphone from my hospital bed, my blood boiling as Brenda expertly squeezed out fake crocodile tears for the camera lens. Madison stared directly into the screen, playing the role of the tragic, heartbroken bride to absolute perfection. She told their hundreds of viewers that I was a bitterly jealous, hormonally unstable sister who had intentionally orchestrated a massive dramatic scene to completely ruin her perfect high society engagement party. Brenda chimed in, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a silk tissue, claiming that she had merely rushed forward to catch me when I clumsily tripped on my own maternity dress. They spun a wild, entirely fabricated narrative that I had weaponized my cybersecurity skills to maliciously trap poor, innocent Jamal inside my car, and then manipulated my federal agent husband into making a false arrest. They painted me as a complete sociopath, a vindictive woman who was punishing her own loving family simply because I was miserable and unhappy in my own marriage. The comment section of their live video immediately flooded with messages of blind support from our extended family and their ignorant high society friends. Aunts and uncles who had not spoken to me in 5 years suddenly left vicious comments calling me a complete disgrace and a monster for putting my own mother in a jail cell. My phone began to vibrate violently with hateful text messages from people who only knew Brenda's highly edited, completely distorted version of the truth. They told me I was a terrible person who did not deserve to be a mother. I simply turned my phone on silent and tossed it onto the cold metal bedside table. I absolutely refused to engage in a public screaming match with pathological liars. I did not need to desperately defend myself to a gullible digital audience, because I held the absolute undeniable truth securely encrypted on my hard drive. Later that evening, the attending nurses finally cleared me to be carefully wheeled into the neonatal intensive care unit. The massive room was kept incredibly dim and strictly quiet to protect the fragile neurological development of the premature infants. The only sounds were the steady rhythmic pumping of mechanical ventilators and the soft, constant beeping of vital sign monitors. I sat in a specialized medical wheelchair right beside my son's clear plastic incubator. Seeing his tiny chest violently rise and fall with the help of a thick breathing tube broke my heart into a million jagged pieces, but it also forged an unbreakable core of absolute titanium inside my chest. I gently reached my hand through the small circular porthole of the incubator, resting my index finger against his impossibly small, fragile hand. I silently promised him that the people who put him in this plastic box would pay for every single wire attached to his body. Declan pulled up a hard plastic chair right beside me, carrying my heavy encrypted company laptop. We did not need to waste our breath arguing with my family on social media. We just needed to let them hang themselves with their own digital rope. I rested the laptop on my lap and rapidly entered my complex administrative passwords, bypassing the initial security firewalls of my cybersecurity company network. I accessed the highly secure remote cloud server that continuously synced with the telematics system of my locked BMW. When Jamal had stolen my keys and confidently locked himself inside my luxury vehicle, he assumed it was just a fancy status symbol. He had absolutely no idea that the moment his physical weight hit the premium leather driver's seat, the hidden high-definition dash cameras and highly sensitive cabin microphones had instantly activated. They had been streaming encrypted high-fidelity audio and video data directly to my private server the entire time he was trapped inside, waiting for the police. Declan leaned in close, his federal investigator instincts completely taking over his exhausted features. We bypassed the video files of Jamal frantically panicking and violently pounding on the reinforced shatterproof windows during the initial police raid. Instead, we filtered the massive data logs to isolate every single phone call Jamal had made from inside the car via the Bluetooth integration system before I had remotely killed the engine. I clicked on the first audio file. The crystal clear acoustic recording filled the quiet space around our son's incubator. We heard Jamal's smooth, charismatic voice echoing through the enclosed cabin of the car. He was speaking frantically to someone on the other end of the line, but he was definitely not calling high-profile real estate investors or wealthy property developers like he had bragged about all evening to my gullible family. We listened to hours of dense audio logs. Declan systematically took detailed, rigorous notes on his yellow federal legal pad, cross-referencing phone numbers and analyzing vocal patterns with clinical precision. We sat in the quiet, dim light of the intensive care unit, methodically unspooling the intricate, massive web of lies Jamal had woven. The loud, toxic smear campaign raging outside on social media meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. Let Brenda and Madison have their fake digital sympathy and their temporary public validation. I was holding the literal keys to their absolute destruction, and I was going to wait for the exact perfect moment to detonate the evidence. Declan leaned forward and pressed the spacebar to play the next sequential audio file. The soft metallic click echoed in the sterile quiet of the neonatal intensive care unit. Jamal's smooth baritone voice filled the space again, but his tone was completely different this time. He was not talking to his supposed high-profile real estate investors or wealthy property developers. He was talking to an elderly woman named Beatrice. His voice dripped with fake sugary affection that made my skin crawl. He called Beatrice his sweet angel and spun a pathetic, elaborate lie about being an overseas oil rig contractor stuck in customs with a frozen bank account. He was practically begging her to wire $20,000 to a secure shell company in the Bahamas so he could finally fly home to marry her. Declan and I exchanged a look of pure, absolute disgust. Declan did not hesitate. He quickly opened a secure portal to his federal database and ran the phone number Jamal had dialed. The registered owner was a 74-year-old widow living alone in a retirement community in Florida. Jamal was not a real estate tycoon building an empire. He was a textbook professional romance scammer. We sat in horrified silence as file after file revealed the exact same predatory script used on at least half a dozen different vulnerable elderly women across the country. He was systematically draining their life savings while parading around our affluent suburb in his expensive suits, pretending to be a wealthy bachelor to impress my naive sister. But a massive, glaring question still remained hanging heavily in the air between us. If Jamal was just a common con artist squeezing small wire transfers out of unsuspecting pensioners, how was he affording the massive daily expenses of his extravagant lifestyle in our city? How was he paying for the $5,000 a month luxury penthouse apartment he claimed to own? How did he afford the ridiculously expensive designer clothes he wore to our family dinners, or the massive diamond engagement ring currently sitting on Madison's finger? The horrifying answers were buried in an audio file date stamped exactly 2 days before the engagement party. Declan clicked the file to play the recording. My stomach instantly dropped into a bottomless freezing pit the second I recognized the sharp, grating, panicked voice of the other caller. It was my mother. Brenda was not calling to ask him excitedly about his wedding plans with Madison. She was calling in an absolute state of sheer blind panic. Her voice was shrill and desperate as she begged Jamal to stop swiping the platinum premium credit card she had secretly given him. I leaned closer to the laptop speakers, completely paralyzed by what I was hearing unfold. Brenda confessed on crystal clear digital audio that the platinum card was secretly opened, using my father's social security number entirely without his knowledge. But the financial betrayal did not stop there. It went so much deeper and darker than a few stolen credit cards. Jamal laughed coldly through the car's Bluetooth microphone. He did not sound like a loving, respectful future son-in-law. He sounded like a ruthless, calculating extortionist. He calmly reminded Brenda that if the credit card was suddenly shut off, or if the cash stopped flowing, he would have absolutely no choice but to pack his bags, leave the state, and abandon Madison at the altar. He told Brenda he needed another $50,000 wired to his account by the end of the week to keep up the lavish charade they had built. And then came the ultimate sickening plot twist that made the air completely leave my lungs. Brenda started openly sobbing on the phone, admitting she had already drained Thomas's primary retirement account. She had literally forged my father's signature on critical financial documents to liquidate his entire pension fund just to keep Jamal dripping in fake wealth. Why would a mother destroy her own husband's financial future and risk federal prison for a stranger? Brenda spelled it out in her own pathetic, desperate words. She told Jamal she could not endure the social humiliation of Madison marrying a broke, unemployed man. All of Brenda's wealthy, judgmental country club friends believed Madison had successfully secured a multimillionaire. Brenda was literally paying Jamal a massive six-figure salary out of her husband's stolen retirement funds just to play the role of the rich, handsome fiancé. It was a sick, twisted extortion scheme fueled entirely by my mother's blinding narcissism and her desperate pathological need for high society validation. Jamal had figured out exactly what Brenda valued most in the entire world, which was her fake public image, and he was aggressively bleeding her dry to protect it. The puzzle pieces of the engagement party violently snapped into place with terrifying clarity. Brenda's unhinged rage when I refused to hand over my car keys, her desperate manic attempt to steal my luxury vehicle, the savage brutal attack with the heavy metal tripod. It was never just about wanting to give Madison a nice wedding gift. It was about Jamal threatening to expose the entire fake operation to our family and friends if he did not get a high-end luxury vehicle to drive around and impress his other elderly victims. My mother had nearly murdered me and severely compromised the life of my newborn son, simply to protect a federal criminal who was systematically destroying her entire family from the inside out. I looked at Declan, the soft blue glow of the encrypted laptop screen illuminating the hard, lethal edge in his eyes. He slowly closed the laptop, securing the digital evidence that would guarantee my mother and Jamal would spend the next decade in federal prison. The absolute depravity of my family was staggering, but it also completely freed me from any lingering guilt. They had built a massive, fragile house of cards based entirely on lies, extortion, and stolen money. All I had to do now was light the match and watch the entire fake empire burn straight to the ground. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the incubator. I did not want to post this evidence on social media. A public mudslinging match would only give Brenda and Madison a chance to spin the narrative again, playing the victims of a cruel cyber attack. I wanted something much more surgical and infinitely more destructive. I opened a secure encrypted terminal on my laptop and quickly generated an untraceable voiceover IP phone number. It bounced through 3 different international servers before registering as a local area code. Declan sat beside me, extracting the most damaging 60 seconds of audio from the massive data log. We chose the exact moment where Jamal's arrogant baritone voice echoed with pure malice. We listened one last time as Jamal laughed cruelly, calling my father an ignorant, oblivious old man who was too busy playing golf to realize his own wife was bleeding him dry. Jamal boasted about how easy it was to manipulate the family, calling Thomas a walking ATM machine with zero financial literacy. To make the package absolutely undeniable, Declan attached 3 high-resolution digital screenshots directly from the federal financial database. The images clearly showed the exact dates and massive withdrawal amounts from my father's primary retirement pension. Right next to those horrifying numbers was the forged electronic signature Brenda had used to authorize the devastating transfers. I compiled the audio file and the financial screenshots into a single encrypted message. I typed a brief, chilling text to accompany the files. Ask your wife where your retirement went. I took a deep breath, looked at my sleeping premature son, and pressed send directly to my father's personal cell phone. Because I had spent my entire life walking on eggshells around my parents, I could visualize exactly how the detonation occurred inside their heavily mortgaged colonial home. I later learned the exact details of the explosive fallout from the frantic, unhinged voicemails Thomas would leave on my phone later that night. Thomas was sitting in his leather recliner in the living room, nursing a glass of expensive scotch, still high on the adrenaline of posting Brenda's bail. Brenda was likely pacing the hardwood floor, refreshing her social media feeds to read the supportive comments from her gullible country club friends. When Thomas's phone chimed with an incoming message from an unknown number, he casually opened it. Jamal's mocking, cruel laughter suddenly filled the quiet living room. Thomas froze the heavy crystal glass, pausing halfway to his mouth. He listened in stunned, horrifying silence as the man he was preparing to welcome into his family viciously insulted his intelligence and bragged about stealing his money. The color completely drained from my father's face. His hands began to visibly shake as he opened the attached image files. He stared at the indisputable federal bank records proving his entire life savings, the money he had worked 40 years to accumulate, was completely gone. Over $300,000 vanished into thin air, replaced by a forged signature that belonged to his own wife. Thomas dropped his glass. It shattered against the stone fireplace, splashing amber liquid across the expensive Persian rug. He sprang from his chair with a terrifying roar of pure, unadulterated rage and marched directly into the kitchen, where Brenda was pouring herself another glass of wine. He violently shoved his smartphone directly into her face, the screen brightly displaying the zero balance of his retirement account. "What is this, Brenda?" Thomas bellowed, his voice shaking the expensive custom cabinets. "Where is my pension? Why is Jamal laughing about draining my accounts?" Brenda physically recoiled, dropping her wine glass onto the marble countertop. For a split second, sheer panic flashed across her carefully Botoxed face. She had been caught absolutely red-handed in a massive federal financial crime. But years of pathological narcissism and habitual lying immediately kicked in. She quickly adjusted her silk robe and attempted to deploy her favorite weapon, which was aggressive reality-distorting gaslighting. "You are being completely hysterical," Brenda snapped, trying to snatch the phone from his trembling hands. "That is highly classified financial information. It is a bridge loan. Jamal is a brilliant real estate developer, and he offered us an exclusive ground floor opportunity to invest in a massive commercial waterfront property. Our money is securely tied up in escrow. He is going to double our entire net worth in 6 months. That audio clip is obviously a deep fake created by Cassie to frame us. You know she works in cybersecurity. She is trying to destroy this family." But Thomas was not buying her toxic lies anymore. The seed of absolute paranoia had been firmly planted deep inside his brain, and it was growing into a massive, suffocating weed. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 35 years and saw a complete stranger. "Do not you dare blame Cassie for this," Thomas screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I just took out a second mortgage on this house to bail you out of jail because you attacked our pregnant daughter. Now I find out you forged my signature and gave my entire retirement fund to a con artist so Madison could have a fancy wedding. We are completely bankrupt, Brenda." The explosive shouting match escalated into a violent, devastating verbal war that tore through the foundation of their marriage. The entire dynamic of the family completely shifted in that singular, brutal moment. The collective hatred and anger that Brenda and Madison had tried to direct at me was instantly redirected inward, tearing them apart like a pack of starving wolves. Thomas locked himself inside his home office, frantically calling his bank to freeze whatever pathetic remaining assets they had left, while Brenda sobbed hysterically on the kitchen floor, realizing her fake empire was violently collapsing around her. Back in the hospital, I watched my phone screen light up. The aggressive, hateful text messages from Thomas, demanding I drop the criminal charges against my mother, abruptly stopped. Instead, a new notification popped up. It was a chaotic, desperate voicemail from Thomas, his voice breaking as he frantically asked me to call him back, begging to know if my federal agent husband could help him track down his stolen retirement funds. The trap had worked flawlessly. They were no longer focused on destroying my life. They were too busy drowning in the catastrophic wreckage of their own. But a pathological narcissist, like my mother, never simply surrenders. Instead of taking Thomas's explosive fury as a necessary wake-up call, Brenda doubled down on her profound delusions. She and Madison frantically scrambled to salvage their crumbling facade. They scoured the city and found a bottom-feeding defense attorney who was perfectly willing to entertain their toxic alternate reality for a massive upfront retainer fee. This was a man notorious for aggressively bullying victims and dragging out frivolous lawsuits to force out-of-court settlements. 3 days after my premature son finally stabilized enough to be taken off his mechanical ventilator, a stern process server walked right up to the hospital security desk. Declan intercepted the man before he could even attempt to breach the maternity ward doors again. My husband returned to my quiet hospital room, holding a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, expensive watermarked paper. He tossed the thick envelope onto the foot of my bed with a look of absolute disgust. It was a formal legal cease and desist order, accompanied by a comprehensive draft of a civil lawsuit. I adjusted my posture against the stiff hospital pillows and began to read through the dense legal jargon. My jaw slowly dropped at the sheer, unadulterated audacity printed boldly on the pages. Brenda and Madison were not just denying the undeniable audio recordings I had sent to Thomas. They were actively legally accusing me of fabricating the entire catastrophic event from scratch. The sleazy defense attorney had written a highly creative, entirely fictional narrative that belonged in a cheap science fiction novel. The document claimed that because I owned and operated a federal cybersecurity firm, I possessed the highly advanced technological skills required to generate malicious artificial intelligence deepfakes. They formally accused me of illegally cloning Jamal's voice to create fraudulent audio files designed to intentionally sabotage Madison's upcoming high society wedding and systematically destroy my mother's impeccable social standing. They claimed the damning financial screenshots I sent to Thomas, showing the drained retirement accounts, were highly sophisticated digital alterations. According to their completely unhinged legal fantasy, Jamal was an innocent, wealthy real estate businessman, caught in the malicious crosshairs of a jealous, vindictive sister who was weaponizing her tech company to commit mass cyber harassment. The absolute mental gymnastics required to believe this narrative were staggering. My mother was actually trying to convince the legal system that I had used my hospital bed recovering from an emergency cesarean section to digitally manipulate banking records and render fake audio files just to ruin a party. They genuinely believed that their hired attack dog of an attorney could intimidate me into doubting my own reality. It was the ultimate escalation of the psychological abuse they had inflicted on me my entire childhood. But now, it was permanently printed on official binding legal letterhead for the court system to evaluate. Then I reached the final page of the document, which contained their list of absolute non-negotiable demands. The blatant extortion attempt was laid out in plain black and white text for the entire world to see. First, they demanded that I immediately contact the county district attorney and fully retract my formal statement regarding the physical assault at the engagement party. I was supposed to legally swear under penalty of perjury that I had simply tripped over my own maternity dress and that the massive bleeding gash on my head was a complete accident. This demand was specifically designed to effectively absolve Brenda of her pending felony charges and keep her out of a state penitentiary. Second, they demanded that I officially transfer the legal title of my company-owned BMW directly into Jamal's name. They framed this absurd demand as necessary financial compensation for his severe emotional distress and the alleged unlawful imprisonment he suffered when I remotely locked him inside the vehicle. They literally wanted me to hand over a $100,000 federal corporate asset to a professional romance scammer just to appease my sister's wildly fragile ego and buy my way back into their good graces. The absolute sheer audacity of demanding my premium company car, right after my mother nearly killed me over it, reached a terrifying peak of toxicity I did not even know was humanly possible. If I refused to comply with these insane demands within 48 hours, their sleazy attorney threatened to officially file a massive multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against me in civil court. Furthermore, they threatened to formally report my cybersecurity company to the Federal Oversight Board for malicious cyber harassment and corporate espionage. They explicitly stated their intention to strip me of my lucrative government contracts, bankrupt my small business, and permanently destroy my professional reputation in the tech industry. They thought they had brilliantly cornered me. They genuinely believed that the terrifying threat of losing my livelihood would force me to drop the criminal charges and quietly hand over my luxury vehicle to a con artist. I handed the thick stack of papers back to Declan. I expected him to be furiously angry, but instead a slow, dark, chilling smile spread across his handsome face. He gently tapped the drafted lawsuit with his index finger, his federal investigator instincts fully activated. By putting these specific demands in writing, their expensive attorney had just crossed a massive, unforgivable legal boundary. They had officially moved from standard family gaslighting into documented federal extortion. Demanding a valuable physical asset and the dropping of criminal charges under the explicit threat of destroying a federal contracting business was textbook witness tampering and illegal blackmail. By sending this pathetic threat, they had foolishly handed us the exact weapon we needed to completely annihilate them. Declan did not waste a single second after reading that extortion letter. He carefully slipped the heavy watermarked paper into a clear plastic evidence bag. The following morning, while I stayed at the hospital, holding our tiny son Declan, walked directly into the heavily guarded federal building downtown. He bypassed his regular desk and went straight to the secure conference room of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He laid the extortion letter on the glass table alongside a heavily encrypted flash drive containing the dash camera footage, the audio recordings of Jamal scamming elderly women, and the forged pension transfer documents Brenda had executed. Declan recused himself from the active investigation to maintain absolute legal integrity, but he handed the entire explosive dossier directly to a senior federal prosecutor and a joint task force supervisor. The financial autopsy began immediately, and it was brutally efficient. Federal forensic accountants do not care about family drama or high society wedding aesthetics. They only care about the hard digital trail of money, and Jamal had left a massive glowing footprint. Within 48 hours, the Financial Crimes Unit obtained expedited federal subpoenas to pry open every single domestic bank account associated with Jamal and his various fake aliases. They discovered a highly complex but ultimately sloppy web of illicit transactions. Jamal had been systematically funneling the stolen cash from vulnerable widows and the drained retirement funds from my father through a series of temporary holding accounts. From there, he was wiring the money to offshore shell companies located in jurisdictions with notoriously lax banking regulations. But because he used American telecommunications networks to execute the scams and crossed both state and international borders to move the stolen funds, his crimes officially triggered federal jurisdiction. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially joined the task force to handle the interstate wire fraud and the romance scam extortion ring. They quickly drafted a massive sealed federal indictment. But before they sent the tactical teams to kick down any doors, they executed a silent, heavily coordinated financial squeeze. It is a standard federal tactic designed to completely paralyze a flight risk suspect. Without any warning or public notification, a federal judge signed an emergency injunction freezing every single domestic bank account, credit line, and digital wallet linked to Jamal. Jamal felt the terrifying heat of the federal squeeze the very next morning. I later heard the exact details of his panicked downward spiral from the federal agents who were actively monitoring his movements. Jamal had walked into a high-end luxury car rental agency downtown, attempting to secure a getaway vehicle using one of his premium credit cards. He swiped the card through the terminal with his usual arrogant smirk, but the machine aggressively beeped and flashed a bright red declined notification. Annoyed, he pulled out a second card, then a third, and finally a debit card linked to his primary checking account. Every single card was instantly rejected by the merchant system with a chilling digital error code instructing the teller to confiscate the plastic. Jamal snatched his cards back, his smooth, charismatic facade completely shattering. He rushed outside to a nearby automated teller machine and aggressively punched in his personal identification number. The digital screen displayed a terrifying message stating his accounts were frozen pending a federal hold and to contact the United States Department of the Treasury immediately. Absolute blind panic set in. Jamal knew exactly what that message meant. The authorities had found his offshore wire transfers, and the federal net was rapidly closing around his neck. He knew he had less than 24 hours before men in tactical gear swarmed his rented luxury apartment. He needed untraceable hard cash immediately to buy a fake passport on the black market and flee the jurisdiction. But Brenda was completely cut off by Thomas, and his own stolen funds were locked down by the government. Like a cornered, desperate rat, Jamal immediately pivoted to his easiest and most gullible target. He drove straight to Madison. My sister was currently living in an absolute state of denial, crashing at a cheap motel because Thomas had effectively kicked her and Brenda out of the house while the divorce and bankruptcy lawyers picked over the remains of his estate. Jamal sat on the edge of the cheap motel bed and deployed the performance of a lifetime. He manufactured a frantic high-stakes lie claiming that a massive international banking glitch had temporarily frozen his real estate development assets. He told Madison that the exclusive luxury venue they had booked for their wedding was demanding an immediate massive cash deposit by the end of the day, or they would completely cancel the reservation and give their date to another wealthy couple. Madison was incredibly desperate. Her entire family was falling apart. Her mother was facing felony assault charges, and her high society friends were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the wedding. She needed this marriage to happen just to prove me and everyone else wrong. She needed the validation of a wealthy husband to salvage her shattered ego. Jamal looked deeply into her eyes, holding her hands, and begged her for a temporary loan. He promised he would pay her back tenfold the moment his offshore funds cleared the alleged banking error. Blinded by her own toxic vanity and an absolute refusal to admit she had been played for a fool, Madison fell right into his trap. She drove straight to her local credit union branch. She bypassed the teller and sat down with a branch manager to completely liquidate her own personal life savings account. It was exactly $42,000, the sum total of every birthday gift, holiday check, and small inheritance she had ever received from our grandparents. She withdrew the entire amount in stacks of crisp $100 bills, placing the heavy cash envelopes directly into Jamal's greedy, waiting hands. Jamal kissed her on the forehead, promising to meet her back at the motel after he secured the luxury wedding venue. He walked out the door carrying her entire financial future in a generic canvas duffel bag. He had absolutely no intention of ever seeing my sister again. He was heading straight for the nearest interstate highway, preparing to vanish into the wind and leave Madison completely destitute. But he had no idea that a dark, unmarked federal surveillance vehicle was sitting quietly in the motel parking lot, watching his every single move. While Jamal was unknowingly leading federal agents on a high-stakes surveillance operation straight toward his inevitable arrest, my own mother and sister were busy planning their next incredibly foolish move. 2 days before our son was finally scheduled to be discharged from the neonatal intensive care unit, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Madison. It was a bizarre, highly dramatic plea for a peaceful reconciliation. She claimed that the extreme stress of the family falling apart was ruining her wedding planning, and that Brenda was crying every single night over the broken relationship. Madison begged for a brief meeting at an upscale public cafe downtown, stating they just wanted to make amends and welcome the new baby into a peaceful, loving family environment before we brought him home. I read the message out loud to Declan while standing in our baby nursery. We both knew my mother and sister were completely incapable of genuine remorse. They were not reaching out because they suddenly cared about my premature son or my physical recovery. They were reaching out because the aggressive extortion letter their sleazy lawyer had sent us completely failed to produce the immediate submission they expected. They were getting increasingly desperate to shut down the pending felony assault charges against Brenda before she ended up in a state penitentiary. Declan immediately recognized the tactical opportunity. We lived in a one-party consent state, which legally meant I could secretly record any conversation I was a part of without notifying the other individuals. Declan went to his federal-issued field kit and pulled out a tiny, highly sophisticated digital audio transmitter. He carefully taped the wire directly underneath the collar of my maternity blouse, securing the micro battery pack against my lower back. I was walking right into the lion's den, but this time, I was completely armed with federal-grade surveillance equipment. The upscale cafe they chose was located in the wealthy district of the city, a place specifically designed for high-society women to see and be seen. Declan and I walked through the glass doors and immediately spotted them sitting in a plush velvet corner booth. Madison was nervously sipping a highly complicated iced latte, while Brenda sat rigidly upright, wearing an expensive designer blazer and oversized sunglasses indoors. Madison still looked incredibly smug, completely unaware that the man she thought was out booking her luxury wedding venue was currently being tracked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation with her entire life savings stuffed into a canvas duffel bag. When we approached the table, Brenda forced a painfully tight artificial smile onto her face. She motioned for us to sit down, attempting to project an aura of benevolent maternal warmth that made my skin completely crawl. She started the conversation with a sickeningly sweet monologue about how much she missed us and how family blood was the most important thing in the world. Madison chimed in, nodding aggressively, claiming that Jamal was so eager to put the terrible misunderstandings behind them so we could all focus on celebrating her upcoming lavish wedding. I sat perfectly still, letting the hidden wire capture every single word of their pathetic, fabricated performance. I calmly asked Brenda exactly what she was proposing to resolve the severe trauma she had inflicted on me. The fake maternal warmth instantly vanished from her face, replaced by the cold, calculating narcissism I had known my entire life. Brenda reached into her expensive leather designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She slid it confidently across the polished marble table, right past my untouched glass of water. It was not a heartfelt apology letter. It was a highly restrictive, legally binding non-disclosure agreement, accompanied by a formal police retraction statement. Sign this right now. Drop the criminal charges and I will graciously let you back into the family, Brenda stated, her voice dropping its sweet tone to become sharp and commanding. We are willing to completely forgive your dramatic overreaction at the party and your ridiculous hostility toward Jamal. If you just sign the paperwork and hand over the vehicle like we asked, we can all go back to normal. Your son deserves to know his grandmother and his aunt. Do not be the bitter person who maliciously ruins this family over a petty misunderstanding. I looked down at the legal documents, my heart pounding with a mixture of absolute disgust and calculated adrenaline. I needed her to verbally incriminate herself on the digital recording without raising any immediate suspicion. I slowly pushed the thick stack of papers back toward the center of the table, acting incredibly hesitant and deeply wounded by her demands. How can I possibly move past this, Brenda? I asked, keeping my voice soft and deliberately vulnerable. You picked up a heavy metal tripod and swung it directly at my head. You ruptured my placenta and almost killed my child. How am I supposed to believe that was just a petty misunderstanding? You could have easily killed me and you did not even care. Brenda let out a loud, exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically behind her oversized sunglasses. She leaned directly across the table, taking the bait with absolute flawless precision. Oh, please, Cassie, you are always making yourself the tragic victim, Brenda hissed, her voice laced with pure venomous contempt. I hit you on purpose because you were being an incredibly stubborn, selfish brat, and you absolutely deserved it. You were intentionally ruining the aesthetic of Madison's perfect night by refusing to give up that stupid car for Jamal. I needed to knock some sense into you. I never meant to hit your stomach, but if you had just listened to me and handed over the keys in the first place, you never would have ended up bleeding on the floor. Now stop being so pathetic, sign the damn paper, and apologize to your sister for trying to ruin her engagement. The confession was absolute perfection. It was a crystal clear, legally binding admission of guilt, accompanied by malicious intent and zero remorse. The hidden microphone pinned to my collar captured every single vicious syllable in high-fidelity audio. I looked at Declan, who gave me a microscopic nod of confirmation. The digital recording was completely secured and instantly backed up to his secure cloud server. I stood up slowly from the velvet booth, leaving the extortion paperwork sitting untouched on the marble table. I looked down at my mother and my sister, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their delusion for the very last time. I am not signing anything. I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. And I am not coming back to this family. You just gave me exactly what I needed to put you away for a very long time. Brenda's face contorted with angry confusion as Declan placed his hand firmly on the small of my back, guiding me toward the cafe exit. Madison shouted something highly offensive after us demanding we come back and pay the coffee bill, but the heavy glass doors closed, silencing her completely. We walked back to our vehicle, holding the digital evidence that would cement Brenda's felony conviction permanently. The trap had sprung flawlessly, and the federal hammer was about to drop on Jamal. Everything was perfectly aligned for the ultimate destruction of their toxic empire. The morning of the preliminary criminal hearing arrived with a heavy gray overcast sky that perfectly matched the cold, sterile atmosphere inside the county courthouse. Declan and I sat quietly in the front row of the gallery directly behind the assistant district attorney. I felt a nervous flutter in my chest, but Declan reached over and firmly squeezed my hand, anchoring me to the present moment. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and my family walked down the center aisle. They had clearly spent hours meticulously coordinating their public wardrobe to project the ultimate image of innocent high society victims. Brenda walked in first, looking completely unrecognizable from the raging, violent woman who had nearly killed me. She had traded her usual flashy designer gowns for a highly conservative pastel blue cardigan, a modest knee-length skirt, and a delicate string of fake pearls. She wore minimal makeup designed to make her look pale, exhausted, and tragically misunderstood. She clutched a small leather-bound Bible in her hands, pressing it against her chest like a protective shield. Madison walked closely behind her, wearing a simple floral dress, playing the role of the devoted, traumatized daughter. Even Thomas was there, dressed in a sharp navy suit. Despite the absolute financial devastation Brenda had brought upon him by giving his retirement to Jamal Thomas's pathological need to protect the family name and avoid the public humiliation of having a convicted felon for a wife, had forced him to temporarily align with her in public. The bailiff ordered everyone to rise as the judge entered the room. She was a stern-looking woman with sharp, calculating eyes and decades of experience on the bench. As soon as she called the courtroom to order, Brenda's sleazy defense attorney stood up immediately, aggressively, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He paced back and forth in front of the judge, delivering an opening statement that was an absolute masterpiece of fiction. Your Honor, we are here today because of a tragic, unfortunate accident that has been maliciously blown, completely out of proportion. The attorney began, his voice echoing with fake sincerity. My client Brenda is a loving, devoted grandmother who was simply trying to host a beautiful engagement party for her eldest daughter. The alleged victim in this case, her youngest daughter Cassie, was highly emotional, heavily pregnant, and wearing inappropriate footwear for a polished hardwood floor. The attorney paused dramatically, gesturing toward Brenda, who immediately lowered her head and dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. He continued spinning his toxic web of lies, painting a picture of a devoted mother acting heroically. There was spilled champagne on the floor near the photo booth. Cassie, who had been acting erratic and combative all evening, lost her footing. Brenda, seeing her pregnant daughter falling, lunged forward in a desperate, heroic attempt to catch her. In the chaotic scramble, Brenda accidentally knocked over a heavy camera tripod, which tragically struck Cassie. This was not an aggravated assault, Your Honor. This was a mother trying to save her child, and now she is being vindictively prosecuted for a simple slip-and-fall accident. I sat perfectly still, listening to the defense attorney literally rewrite history. It was the ultimate manifestation of my family's lifelong gaslighting, but this time it was happening on the official legal record. They were attempting to legally mandate my abuse out of existence. To solidify this completely fabricated narrative, the defense called Madison to the witness stand as their primary character witness. Madison placed her hand on the Bible and swore a sacred legal oath to tell the whole truth. She sat in the wooden witness box, looking nervously at the judge before launching into a highly rehearsed script. Cassie was causing a massive scene all night. Madison testified, her voice trembling with fake emotion. She was incredibly jealous of my engagement because my fiancé Jamal is so successful. When she threw a tantrum near the gift table, I clearly saw her slip on a puddle of spilled champagne. My mother screamed and dove across the floor to break her fall. The tripod just collapsed on top of them. Cassie was so angry and humiliated by her own clumsiness that she decided to blame my mother out of spite. She even used her tech company app to lock my innocent fiancé inside her car just to cause more chaos and ruin my special night. The assistant district attorney strongly objected to the relevance of the car lock comment, but the damage to the narrative was already done. Madison stepped down, looking incredibly smug. Next, the defense called Thomas to the stand. I watched my father, the man who had secretly screamed at Brenda for stealing his entire life savings, sit in the witness chair and commit blatant perjury to protect her. Thomas confidently corroborated every single lie Madison had just told. He looked the judge squarely in the eye and testified that he was standing mere feet away when the alleged accident happened. He swore under oath that Brenda never picked up the tripod and never swung it at my head. He painted Brenda as the matriarch of a perfect family who was currently being victimized by an unstable hormonal daughter. The judge leaned forward, resting her chin on her clasped hands. She possessed a sharp, analytical gaze, and I could tell she was highly skeptical of the perfectly synchronized, identically rehearsed testimonies. She asked Thomas a few pointed questions about the exact angle of the fall and the specific location of the spilled champagne. Thomas stuttered slightly, his face flushing a deep red, but he rigidly stuck to the script their expensive lawyer had written for them. He refused to break eye contact with the judge, blindly cementing his own legal guilt. After Thomas was officially excused from the stand, the defense attorney confidently adjusted his silk tie and officially rested his case for the preliminary hearing. He walked back to the defense table and placed a comforting, reassuring hand on Brenda's shoulder. Brenda looked over her shoulder directly at me. A fleeting, arrogant smirk crossed her face before she quickly hid it behind her tissue. She genuinely believed she had won. She thought that because her husband and daughter had successfully lied under oath, the court would have no choice but to dismiss the felony charges due to a lack of concrete evidence. They had all just committed federal perjury in an open courtroom, compounding their legal jeopardy exponentially. They had dug their graves as deep as humanly possible, entirely unaware that the prosecutor had not even begun to present the state's evidence. Declan leaned over and whispered softly in my ear, telling me to get ready. The defense had confidently rested their case based entirely on smoke and mirrors, and now it was our turn to completely shatter their reality with indisputable high-definition truth. The assistant district attorney stood up and straightened his lapels, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the courtroom. He looked directly at the judge and calmly announced that the state would like to call its first and only rebuttal witness. He called my name. I took a deep breath, released Declan's hand, and stood up from the wooden gallery bench. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight. I could feel the burning, intense weight of my family staring daggers into my back, but I did not falter for a single second. I walked through the swinging wooden gate, stepped up into the witness box, and placed my right hand on the Bible, swearing the exact same sacred oath my father and sister had just maliciously violated. When I sat down, I finally allowed myself to look directly at the defense table. Brenda was still clutching her fake pearls, her lips pressed into a tight, arrogant line. She genuinely thought I was about to engage in a desperate, emotional screaming match. She thought I was going to frantically try to convince the judge that they were lying, using only my word against the combined sworn testimony of her Thomas and Madison. But I had no intention of arguing with pathological liars. The prosecutor approached the podium. He did not ask me to recount the emotional trauma of the night. He did not ask me to describe the pain of the assault or the fear of losing my child. Instead, he simply asked me to state my profession for the official court record. I leaned toward the microphone and stated clearly that I was the founder and chief executive officer of a federal cybersecurity and surveillance firm. The prosecutor then asked me to verify the contents of a small silver object. I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulled out an encrypted titanium flash drive, and handed it to the court bailiff, who transferred it to the prosecutor. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began addressing the bench with a confident, razor-sharp tone. "The defense has presented a highly emotional narrative based entirely on eyewitness testimony. They claim the victim slipped on spilled champagne and the defendant heroically attempted to catch her. However, eyewitness testimony is notoriously subjective. The state prefers to rely on objective, undeniable forensic truth." The prosecutor turned toward the defense table, his eyes locking directly onto Brenda's sleazy attorney. What the defense failed to realize when they aggressively demanded my client drop these charges is that her cybersecurity firm does not just manage federal vehicle telematics. They also hold exclusive government and commercial contracts for high-end property surveillance. Coincidentally, the lavish rented mansion where the engagement party took place had its entire security and audio-visual network completely upgraded by my client's company exactly 1 month prior to the event. The color instantly drained from Madison's face in the gallery. Thomas gripped the wooden bench in front of him so hard his knuckles turned completely white. Brenda's arrogant smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She slowly turned her head to look at her attorney, but the man was completely frozen, staring blankly at the flash drive in the prosecutor's hand. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with intense interest. She immediately granted permission to admit the digital evidence. The court technician took the titanium drive and plugged it directly into the courtroom main display system. 4 massive high-definition flat-screen monitors mounted on the courtroom walls simultaneously hummed to life. This was not the grainy, blurry black-and-white security footage people are used to seeing on the evening news. This was state-of-the-art military-grade surveillance. The video loaded in crystal-clear, vibrant, full-color 4K resolution, accompanied by perfectly synchronized, high-fidelity digital audio. The entire courtroom was suddenly transported right back to the engagement party. The audio blasted through the courtroom speakers, capturing Brenda's voice with absolutely perfect, terrifying clarity. "You work from home on your fake little computer business," she hissed, her voice dripping with the exact venom she had just spent hours trying to hide from the judge. "Jamal is a real estate investor. He needs to look the part. I am your mother. Give me the keys right now." The judge's jaw visibly tightened. The sweet, devoted grandmother persona Brenda had meticulously crafted for the court completely dissolved in less than 10 seconds. Then the visual horror began. The camera angle was positioned perfectly above the dining room, capturing every single inch of the polished hardwood floor. The entire courtroom watched in stunned, absolute silence as I turned my back to walk away. They watched Brenda's face twist into a mask of pure, psychotic rage. They saw her reach out and grab the heavy metal tripod. There was no puddle of spilled champagne anywhere near us. There was no stumbling. There was absolutely no heroic attempt to catch a falling pregnant woman. There was only Brenda stepping forward, raising the heavy metal stand like a baseball bat and swinging it directly at the back of my skull with maximum lethal force. The sickening crack of the metal hitting bone echoed through the courtroom speakers, followed instantly by my agonizing scream. A loud collective gasp erupted from the gallery. Several people physically covered their mouths in horror. Even the stoic, seasoned judge physically recoiled in her high-backed leather chair, her eyes wide with absolute shock at the sheer brutality of the unprovoked attack. But the video did not stop there. It mercilessly documented the chilling aftermath. The monitors showed me collapsing into the sharp corner of the oak table and hitting the floor. It showed the massive dark pool of blood and amniotic fluid rapidly spreading across the wood. It captured Brenda aggressively, waving her arms, threatening the concerned guests, and screaming that I was just faking it for attention. The high-definition microphone picked up Madison complaining about her designer shoes, while literally stepping right over my bleeding body. And finally, it captured Jamal smiling smugly as he stole the keys from my purse before abandoning me to die. The perjury trap had snapped shut with catastrophic bone-crushing force. Thomas and Madison had just sat in the witness box, placed their hands on a holy book, and sworn under oath that my mother tried to save me from a slip and fall. The crystal-clear video proved unequivocally that they had maliciously coordinated a massive lie to a federal judge to protect a violent abuser. I looked over at the defense table. The sleazy defense attorney was completely pale, sweating profusely. He was staring at the large monitor in absolute horror, realizing that his clients had blatantly lied to him and that he had just unknowingly facilitated massive organized perjury in open court, putting his own law license in severe jeopardy. He slowly slid his chair away from Brenda, physically distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. Brenda could no longer hide behind her conservative pastel blue cardigan and her fake pearls. The monstrous reality of who she truly was had been broadcast for the entire legal system to witness. She gasped for air, her chest heaving violently in a full-blown panic attack. Her legs completely gave out beneath her. She physically collapsed backward into her heavy wooden chair, her arms hanging limply at her sides. A choked, pathetic, animalistic sob escaped her trembling lips. She had built a lifetime of manipulation and gaslighting to control our reality, but against the cold, unforgiving lens of a 4K security camera, her entire toxic empire shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The courtroom remained locked in a stunned, deafening silence for several long seconds after the video finished playing. The judge turned her furious gaze onto the defense table. "Your client did not heroically catch a falling pregnant woman, counselor," the judge stated, her voice slicing like a serrated blade. "Your client executed a vicious, unprovoked assault and orchestrated a massive conspiracy to commit perjury in my courtroom." The defense attorney rapidly stood up, stammering incoherently. The judge silenced him with a sharp crack of her gavel. "Bail is immediately revoked," the judge declared, leaning over the high wooden bench. "Defendant Brenda is remanded into state custody pending trial for aggravated assault and felony perjury. This court is officially directing the district attorney to open immediate perjury investigations into the sworn testimonies of Thomas and Madison." Two bailiffs immediately stepped forward, grabbing Brenda by her arms. She did not fight them. The steel handcuffs clicked loudly around her wrists. Madison screamed, jumping up from the gallery bench, but a bailiff shot her a warning glare that instantly froze her. They dragged Brenda through the side door, taking her to the holding cells. The judge struck her gavel, adjourning the preliminary hearing. Thomas and Madison were left standing in the gallery, completely abandoned and exposed. Their smug, arrogant confidence had completely evaporated, leaving behind two terrified, pathetic individuals who had just perjured themselves for absolutely nothing. Declan put his arm protectively around my shoulders as we watched them stumble blindly toward the heavy wooden exit doors. They walked like zombies, completely shell-shocked by the sheer velocity of their absolute destruction. But the nightmare was far from over for my family. In fact, the secondary explosion was already waiting for them just outside the courtroom. Thomas and Madison pushed through the heavy double doors, stepping out into the brightly lit marble hallway. Jamal was standing there, leaning casually against the wall, checking his expensive gold watch. He cowardly refused to enter the courtroom to testify, deciding instead to wait outside while his future in-laws lied to a federal judge on his behalf. Madison immediately ran toward him, tears streaming down her face, desperate for any shred of comfort. "Jamal, baby, it was a disaster," Madison sobbed, reaching out to grab his tailored suit jacket. Cassie had a hidden security video. "They took Mom away in handcuffs and the judge is threatening to arrest us too. We need to leave right now." Jamal's eyes widened in sudden panic, realizing the legal firewall protecting him had just completely collapsed. He aggressively shoved Madison's hands away, his charismatic mask dropping instantly to reveal the desperate cornered criminal underneath. He turned to sprint toward the courthouse exit, but he did not even make it 3 steps. Before Jamal could reach the stairwell, the heavy glass doors of the corridor burst open. A highly coordinated team of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents swarmed the hallway, moving with terrifying tactical precision. 2 massive agents grabbed Jamal by his shoulders, physically lifting him off his expensive Italian leather shoes and slamming him violently face first against the cold marble wall. "Do not move a single muscle," the lead federal agent roared, pressing his forearm heavily against the back of Jamal's neck. "You are under federal arrest for interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and extortion." Madison let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream, staggering backward until she hit the opposite wall. She watched in absolute mind-numbing horror as the federal agents forcefully ripped the expensive gold watch off Jamal's wrist and pulled the canvas duffel bag containing her entire stolen life savings from his shoulder. Jamal frantically tried to lie his way out of the handcuffs, shouting that this was a massive misunderstanding and demanding to call his high-powered real estate attorneys. The lead agent just laughed, a harsh, deeply satisfying sound. "You do not have any real estate attorneys," Jamal, the agent, said coldly, thoroughly patting him down for concealed weapons. "And you do not have any offshore accounts left either. We seized every single stolen penny this morning. You are going away for a very long time." Madison collapsed onto the hard marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The wealthy, handsome investor she had smugly paraded around to make me jealous was nothing but a predatory parasite. She had betrayed her own pregnant sister, committed felony perjury, and handed over her entire financial future to a man who was currently being dragged away in federal chains. Just when I thought the absolute carnage had peaked, Thomas let out a sharp, agonizing gasp. He was standing near the courtroom doors, completely frozen, staring down at his smartphone. The bright digital screen illuminated his pale, terrified face. It was an automated emergency notification from his primary banking institution. The message coldly informed him that his secondary high-interest mortgage was officially in severe default. Because the federal government had just seized all of Jamal's illicit accounts, the massive illegal loan Brenda had secretly taken out using Thomas's forged signature had completely imploded. Thomas looked up, his eyes completely hollow and dead. The notification was a formal declaration of immediate foreclosure. He had just lost the sprawling brick colonial house he had spent his entire life working to afford. He had just lost his retirement fund. He had lost his wife to a state prison sentence. He had lost his golden child daughter to complete financial ruin and a pending perjury investigation. In the incredibly brief span of exactly 10 minutes, the toxic empire my parents had spent decades aggressively building had been systematically, aggressively, and permanently dismantled. Declan and I stood quietly in the doorway of the courtroom, watching the absolute devastation unfold in the hallway. We did not say a single word to them at all. Karma had just delivered the most brutal, flawless execution I had ever witnessed, and my family was left to drown in the catastrophic wreckage of their own making. Fast forward exactly 3 months from that explosive morning at the county courthouse. The criminal justice system is notoriously slow, but when federal joint task forces and irrefutable digital video evidence are heavily involved, the gavel drops with breathtaking, terrifying speed. Brenda is currently sitting in a state correctional facility serving a mandatory consecutive 3-year felony sentence for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and severe witness tampering. She permanently traded her custom-tailored designer blazers and expensive fake pearl necklaces for a standard-issue scratchy orange Department of Corrections jumpsuit. Her highly coveted country club membership was immediately and permanently revoked the very same day her tear-stained mugshot was broadcast across every single local news network. There are absolutely no high society luncheons or elegant charity galas in the penitentiary cafeteria. Her entire identity, which was entirely dependent on projecting a flawless, affluent public image, was completely vaporized by the unforgiving reality of a concrete cell. Thomas did not wait for the criminal trial to officially conclude before legally severing his ties to a convicted felon. The absolute financial devastation Brenda brought down upon his head forced him to file for an aggressive contested divorce. With his primary retirement accounts completely liquidated by Jamal and the federal government actively seizing his remaining assets to cover the fraudulent loans Brenda had authorized, he had absolutely no choice but to surrender the sprawling brick colonial house back to the bank. The man who used to smugly boast about his immaculate heated swimming pool and perfectly manicured lawns is now leasing a cheap, cramped one-bedroom apartment on the undesirable industrial side of town. He spends his days sitting across the desk from court-appointed bankruptcy attorneys, desperately trying to salvage whatever microscopic fragments of his destroyed credit score remain. He called my phone exactly once, begging for financial assistance and crying about his ruined reputation. I let the call go directly to voicemail and formally forwarded the audio file to my corporate legal team to ruthlessly enforce the permanent restraining order. Madison arguably suffered the most poetic and devastating karma of them all. When Jamal was formally indicted on 74 separate counts of interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and massive extortion, the federal prosecutors dragged Madison directly into the investigative crosshairs. Because she had willingly liquidated her personal life savings and handed the cash directly to a known federal fugitive, the Internal Revenue Service flagged her entire financial history for a massive comprehensive forensic audit. They completely froze her checking accounts to aggressively investigate whether she was a willing co-conspirator in his international money laundering operation. Her lavish dream wedding was abruptly canceled. The exclusive luxury vendors she had smugly bragged about kept every single one of her non-refundable deposits. She is completely bankrupt, legally abandoned, and working double shifts at a terrible minimum wage retail job just to pay her mounting legal defense fees. Her wealthy friends completely excommunicated her, treating her like an absolute pariah. While my biological family was busy suffocating under the heavy weight of their own toxic consequences, Declan and I were busy breathing life into our brand new world. Yesterday, we officially walked through the heavy sliding glass doors of the neonatal intensive care unit for the very last time. We carried our son out of the hospital in a heavy reinforced car seat, his tiny lungs finally strong enough to breathe the outside air without the constant mechanical hum of a ventilator or the irritating pinch of continuous positive airway pressure tubes. His oxygen saturation levels are completely normal, and his weight gain has been absolutely phenomenal. He is perfectly healthy, thriving, and entirely safe from the poisonous environment I was forced to grow up in. As Declan securely locked the heavy infant seat into the back of my recovered company vehicle, I looked at the man who had stood like an impenetrable titanium shield between me and the people who desperately wanted to destroy us. I realized in that exact moment what true family actually means. It is not an arbitrary biological lottery that forces you to endure endless psychological abuse, physical violence, and financial manipulation. True family is an active daily choice. It is about establishing ironclad personal boundaries and possessing the absolute unwavering courage to enforce them, even when the people pushing back happen to share your last name. My cybersecurity company is currently expanding rapidly, securing 2 massive new federal contracts, and my financial independence has never been stronger. I used my technological resources and my legal rights to permanently cut the toxic cord, protecting my peace and securing my son's future. They tell you blood is thicker than water. They use that phrase as a heavy psychological guilt trip to force you to tolerate unacceptable toxic behavior from the people who are supposed to love you the most. But when your blood is literally on the floor, you find out exactly who is willing to hand you a towel and who is willing to step right over your bleeding body just to save their own pathetic public image. Protect your peace at all costs. Protect your assets with everything you have. Never let anyone manipulate you into sacrificing your physical safety or your financial security to fund their delusions. Let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to legally sever ties with a toxic family member to protect yourself. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that setting firm boundaries is the ultimate form of self-respect. Thank you for watching my story, and remember that the family you actively choose to build will always be stronger than the one you were forced to leave behind.